Senator Lauren Book, nice to see you.
How are you?
I'm doing great. I know that you're busy because you have your twins being homeschooled as we speak, doing science classes at this morning.
They are learning all about the solar system at 3 years old. So
Yeah. Oh my
pretty
gosh.
serious.
Well, you never know when that's going to come in handy, especially down in Florida.
Yeah, they're learning about the waves, the tides, all the things. So
Yeah. So anyways, I want to just really thank you for taking time to participate in the Why We Do What We Do interview series that we've been putting on for Marsy's Law, that you have been such an ally and great supporter of. So I thank you right from the outset. We should just dive right in because you have such an incredibly compelling story. Obviously, you're a state senator from Florida. You're an ally and supporter of Marsy's Law. You're the founder and CEO of Lauren's Kids, which is dedicated to preventing child abuse and also healing survivors, which is also an equally important part of your cause. Your story is incredibly compelling as you tell it. You go from victim to survivor to thriver. And so without even getting too much more into any of what you do at Lauren's Kids, which we'll get to, can you tell us a little bit about how this all started when you were an 11-year-old girl working in the chocolate shop with your mom?
yeah. So and thank you, Peter, so much. The minute I learned of Marsy's story and Marsy's Law and the initiative, it was something that we wanted and I wanted to engage on immediately. As you said, being a survivor of a violent crime changes your outlook, changes your beliefs, your security, your safety, and your outlook on life. And I think that certainly really formed some of my beliefs and the things that I fight for every day and advocate for in the Florida Senate and beyond. So I did start my journey through advocacy, from a really dark place. From the time that I was 11 years old until I was 16, I was sexually abused, physically abused by my family's female nanny. She lived in my home. My abuse went on 365 days a year. There wasn't a break. There wasn't, time off. Oftentimes, my parents were in the next room and my brother was in the same bed. Those things happened, and you lose your voice. You lose your power. You don't believe that you have the ability to stop the things that are happening from happening. And the systemic abuse continues on, and it became more violent. And I felt trapped and didn't think that there was a way out. At a point in time, probably at the lowest point in time, as a means to control me, while Dina, my abuser, urinated and defecated on me. And like I said, being a victim and a child in that place, are things that you can never imagine. And I think that coming out the other side, when you disclose the abuse, finally, the things from your nightmare, and you're told over and over and over by your abuser that no one will believe you, they'll think you're dirty, they'll think you're bad, they'll send you away. And first of all, that doesn't happen. But second of all, you now are thrust into a new reality and a new world where, you're having to fight on a different front. And that front is a system that's not necessarily set up to make sure that you're okay and that you're safe. And so the day that I disclosed my abuse to a therapist and then to my father, while Dina fled to Oklahoma, where she was found coaching 10-year-old girls in soccer. She was eventually brought back to the state of Florida, and a whole different fight began. And I'll say, and I'll tell this piece of the story because I think it is important. This whole journey started, and I was seeing a therapist and dealing with very, very difficult psychological issues that came from the abuse and the disclosure, self-mutilation, anorexia, and PTSD certainly. And actually got a call from our victims advocate telling me that I needed to get an HIV and AIDS test, only to find out in the state of Florida, I wasn't even entitled to the request of a test, that the judge would sit on that request and let us know if it were possible. Now, I, of course, got a test and it came back negative, but those results, that can lay dormant in a system for some time before it will show up. And so, you know, the need to know Waldina's status was very important, but we were denied that. That was one of my first forays into the judicial process. And, you know, then you've got the different phases of depositions and retelling of tales and having to see your abuser in court. I mean, the things that still to this day, you know, can sometimes bring me back to a very bad place. You know, as a young kid, you're having to see that. And that was very, very difficult. And I think that the system just isn't set up for victims. In fact, the day before my 18th birthday was our final hearing in this case. And I was always struck when we got into Marsy's law and how victim-centric it is, and how they take an individual and want to make sure and protect that survivor of a crime to heart. And so I just, you know, it was something that I wanted to fight for. You know, we know, and I know that we wanted to talk a little bit about statistics. We know that 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys will become the victim of child sexual abuse before their 18th birthday. We know that 1 in 5 kids that touch a digital device, regardless of their gender, will be solicited for sex online. However, we also know that 95% of sexual abuse is preventable through education and awareness. And so, you know, that's sort of where the foundation took off. And we work each and every day to bring about awareness and education, because we know that we can prevent these types of crimes so children and survivors don't have to engage with the system that is not, up until the point where we passed this amendment, was not set up necessarily to keep them the most safe.
Yeah, and Senator, you know, one of the things that you talked about was when Waldina, or Waldy, as you called your nanny, fled to Oklahoma, and she started to coach 10-year-old girls' soccer teams. Mm-hmm. And, you know, another statistic that I know you talk about a lot is the fact that a child predator, the FBI statistics have borne out that an average child predator will assault 117 children before they're caught. And you talk about, you know, Waldina moving to Oklahoma, and sadly, as you've described it, she was trying to build that trust again, and trying to get people and bring them into their, into that web, into that abuse abyss, as you call it. Yeah. And it's so frightening to think, as you've said, you know, when you give these talks all around the country, you give such compelling speeches, that, you know, people have no idea that these things can happen in the house next door, and people that you have no idea, even your parents had so much trust in your nanny. Yeah. Because your nanny would, as you used to describe it, she would bring you into her circle of trust and say, you want some, and offer you extra dessert. Yeah. And say, do you want to stay up a little bit later than your little brother and your little sister? Yeah. And all of these things that all of a sudden you became Waldy's buddy when you were 11 years old. And that's what brought you in to her circle.
Absolutely. You know, it's a process that we call the grooming process, and you identify it so correctly. And while it seems so benign, you know, with extra dessert and getting to stay up to watch Jay Leno, I'm dating myself, and getting shotgun in the car without having to call it, you know, that is how it's, you know, very serious in a house of 3 kids, being the oldest, and you're always told that you have to let the younger ones have their way. But I think that is why predators are so masterful and so deadly dangerous, because they do have a modus operandi. We know that they groom children and families and dynamics for abuse. They are called predators for a reason. They don't pick the strongest of the herd, if you will. They'll pick children who they know are people pleasers, who don't want to rock the boat, who aren't going to fight back. We've unfortunately seen some really terrible, like different books that predators have written, and they'll pick children who are nonverbal, non-mobile. They'll select children from families where there's substance abuse, mental health issues in the family, lower socioeconomic status. We saw that with Jerry Sandusky, Michael Jackson, the Boy Scout. I mean, over and over and over, we find these different, the pattern repeats itself. It's because, I do this with kids all the time, and I can do it with you too, if you'd like. But if you thought about, what does a stranger look like? Somebody who may hurt you, and you ask these kids to draw what a stranger looks like. They'll, every time we've done it, draw a man that's tall with messy clothes, messy hair, with a gun, a knife, or a sword, a leash, or candy. And that is who they think is going to hurt them. But we know, and the reality, as we talked about, is 90% of the time, children are abused by someone who's in their life every single day. That these are the coaches, the aunts, the uncles, the paramour. They're there. And we have to pay attention to that. We have to look for red flags. We have to teach children to be empowered to use their voice to stay safe, to identify feelings and behaviors that make them feel unsafe or not quite right, and then how to access help. And that is, one of the most important things that we can do to turn the tide here. If these terrible things do happen, that we make us and set up the system to be on a more even playing field.
Yeah, and one of the things that you talk about a lot is that these predators, what you refer to as thriving in the shadows of secrecy. And I remember when you detailed your 6 years of abuse during one of your talks, and people will say, well, why didn't you say something? Why would you let it go on for 6 days, let alone 6 years? But these predators are so crafty, the way that they keep you in the shadow of secrecy. And they say, why would you tell? No one will believe you, she used to say to you. And she used to say, they're just going to send you away. So she frightened you into basically paralysis.
Yeah, I think that is a big piece of it. I think that there's the shame and embarrassment. At the time, a lot of people, and Mary Kay Letourneau, not a lot of people know who that is. Some people do. That was big in my dynamic with Waldy because she was just being arrested at that time. And she would use that often. Look what's happening to her. You don't want that to happen to me. And I think the thing that's really complicated for people to understand, it wasn't terrible all the time. In fact, I loved Waldina. She provided, at that time, she provided a tremendous amount, in a family that had a lot of dysfunction. She provided a stability. She provided a safe space. And I think that is something that people simply do not understand. When you think about offenders or predators, we all think, right, it's that image that those kids draw, that it's the boogeyman, and it is not. That is not what happens. If that were the case, children would run the first time. And we know that part of this is a psychological manipulation of a child. And yes, I would not allow that to happen today, but I'm 30 years old, and no, that wasn't a blip on the screen. I'm whatever years old, and I'm not going to let that happen, but I've come a long way. But explaining that and dealing with that when you're 10 years old, and we think about what is a 10-year-old, those are all very complex and difficult things. And I think that is a piece of this that's important. Predators trap kids. We saw this a lot with, in some of the cases with the Boy Scouts, where some of the offenders or predators will kind of trap these kids with, drugs or alcohol, or taking naked photos of those children. And look what you've done. I'm going to tell your mom and dad, you're the one who's going to get in trouble. These kids aren't old enough and don't have the ability to say, well, no. What you're doing, that's what's wrong here. And so it kind of continues to perpetuate, and then the child doesn't really know how to get out of that. And, we've seen all different types of, and we know that children disclose at different rates and different times and in different ways. And that's why it's so important that we actually hear children when they're telling us the things that are happening.
Yeah, and speaking of that, you talk about your abuse as your X, and then you wanted to find out your why or your purpose, and you realized that your why was going to be trying to reach these kids and trying to reach kids earlier. So you became a school teacher, and you talk about a time when you were teaching, I think it was a reading readiness class, and one of your young students came up to you and told you something, and right away it was a red flag for you.
Yeah, I think you are good with the research. It is, I'll start the story with a little bit of a funny thing, because I think it's important when you're talking about things that are so serious, to kind of, laugh when you can. And so my kids are 3. And so I teach them all the names for their private parts, because that is something that predators take advantage of, right? We all have that uncomfortable feeling when you have to have the talk with your kids and you think it has to be at a certain time and this whole thing building up to it. When the reality is, we want kids at a very early age to be empowered to use their voice, to understand what is safe versus unsafe, what is theirs. And so, my son was at tennis the other day and ran to Coach Bobby and said, "Coach Bobby, guess what?" And he said, "What, buddy?" He goes, "I have a penis and Kennedy has a vagina and you have a penis." And I was like, well, he's getting it. But I was so proud. And here's why. And it goes back to the story that you were telling.
For purposes of the audience that don't know who Kennedy is
my daughter. Yes, Kennedy is my daughter. So yes, that's true. And when in that situation, when I was in that classroom, it was dismissal time. And, that could be like a crazy time and everybody is doing different things and going different places. And you're just trying to make sure you aren't losing any ducks. And this little girl came over and told me that she was playing a game with her daddy, and it had a special name, Shucky. And I've heard many different names for private parts that I never thought that I would, but that her daddy played with her Shucky. And now somebody who may not constantly live in the world that unfortunately I live in would say, "I'm glad your daddy is playing with you," and try and continue to move the kids to what bus they needed to go to or wherever. But when I heard that, I said, "Oh, what and how do you play Shucky with daddy?" She instantly knew that she was not supposed to talk about that. And that was the name that her dad had given her private part. And so even in that situation, we see and we understand how predators and how prolific they are and how dangerous that they are. When we don't give kids all of that information, predators and offenders use our fears not only against us, but our kids. And so it's so important that that we teach kids at a very early age, not, before any conversation about safety or whatever, that it starts with giving them proper names for their private parts, where you talk about, using, what is safe versus unsafe, and that something that is safe for you may not be safe for you, and how, when you feel unsafe, to get the help that you need. And I think that, those are they have all formed kind of who and what I am today and what we work to talk to kids about. Because again, when I grew up, it was the whole go hug your grandpa, give him a kiss, even if I didn't want to. And what are we doing in that situation? We're telling a child that what I want as an adult supersedes your wishes, wants, and desires for your body. And so, it's how can we readdress and relook at the things that maybe we've done before, but need to relook at.
Yeah, and of all the frightening statistics that some of which you mentioned, one of them that pops out that is encouraging because of Lauren's kids and the fact that you've proactively taken this statistic and said, "I'm going to do something about it," is the fact that 95% of sexual abuse, I'll go back to it again, can be prevented with education and awareness. And so starting with that experience that you had with that little girl when you were doing reading readiness, you then dedicated yourself to both aspects of that, education and awareness, as part of the foundation of Lawrence Kids. Education, you have created a curriculum. You worked with someone and created a curriculum called Safer, Smarter Kids, which is now in 16,000 classrooms in 37 states and all around the world. Yeah. And could you tell us a little bit about Safer, Smarter Kids?
Yeah, it's certainly taken on a life of its own. And every time we, we grow and we kind of look at what we're doing, I look around the room with the educators that we work with. We have, over like 150 years of educational experience in the room. And it is a curriculum that spans from pre-K through grade 12, all about how we can teach our children how to stay safe. For the older kids, we're talking about things like digital safety, an appropriate balanced relationship, imbalance of power, human trafficking, all of the different things that keep our children safe, advocacy, how to use your voice. And we also teach teachers how to identify the signs of abuse. There's letters home to parents so that they can continue the conversation with kids. For guidance counselors, what does this look like and how can you keep a child safe? And beyond that, for a new teacher, how do you report abuse? What does that look like? How do you create a safe space in your classroom? School research, all of the different parts and components, because you said something so correctly, and I want to go back to that. I think that the most important thing for me was to create a safe space for kids that I didn't have. And I know had I had the curriculum that we've created, my abuse would not have gone on for as long as it did. It would have still happened, but I would have told much sooner. I would have identified somebody that I could tell. And I would hope that educator would go and report and do the things that they need to do. And so we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go.
Yeah, and one of the things that I find so compelling about the curriculum is that you really empower children to become what you talked about as their first line of defense in their own safety, which points to, if it existed when you were a little girl working in the chocolate shop, that maybe it wouldn't have gone on for 6 years because you would have been educated about how to be the first line of defense. You talk about things like the safety stop sign and the triangle of trust. And, for people who aren't aware and aren't familiar with the curriculum, they really should go to your website and become familiar with it, because it's really important work. And like you said, incredible amounts of intellectual firepower and a lot of hours and research that have gone into it. And then there's the awareness piece with the education and awareness. And if you could talk a little bit about your Why I Walk campaign, because I think that is absolutely amazing. I don't know how you did it for as many years as you did.
Yeah, had I known that we were going to be walking for as many years as we were, I would have done a Segway in my shoes or something. Like, certainly we started that first year. And I think that part of it was, growing up in and around the legislative process with my dad, who was a lobbyist, understanding that true change occurs. And I go back to that story that we talked about with the HIV and AIDS test. It happens in Tallahassee. It happens at a legislative level where you can really right wrongs and make things better. And so that first year I was, we walked literally from the house that my abuse occurred in here in South Florida all the way to Tallahassee. It was 30 plus miles every day. It is hot. It is terrible. I say that it's awesomely awful. It's the most awesomely awful thing that I've ever done. You lose toenails, you get second and third degree burns on your legs. And I could treat any blister that ever were to befall anyone. But I've met some incredible people along the way. And every year it's grown. That first year was 500 miles, 1,000 miles, 1,500. And the people that we've met all along the way have really taught me a tremendous amount. And I think that while it started off as a way, for me to bring about awareness and have people come together and share, the issues and the things that have happened to them, and to inform policy. I think it really, it did something for me. And that was, growing up, there was no model for what a survivor, a thriving survivor looked like. Nobody talked about childhood sexual abuse. It was happening, certainly, but there was no, like, this is what you can be. This is how you can grow. This is how you thrive. And so it became, an empowering thing for some of the young people that came out with us. And they taught me a tremendous amount. I mean, some of the kids just still to this day are in my life, and they continue to make me proud every day. And now that I'm in the legislature, we can't get on the road for 42 days. So we walk 42 hours straight in the Capitol, which is, a whole nother thing. But I think really it's a movement that we had people drive from Ohio to come and walk with us, which, again, it's giving someone an opportunity to have to walk it out and to feel like no matter what has happened, that is a piece of your story, but that is not all of what you are.
And one of the incredible messages that you continue to talk about is it's okay to tell. And that's what takes these predators out of the shadows of secrecy that they love to thrive in. If you empower children and you empower victims, that it is okay to tell, that they're not going to send you away, and they're not going to think something's wrong with you, and they are going to believe you. And it is okay to tell. And you've done such an amazing job trying to remove that stigma for all survivors, not just in Florida, but for, you've gained national and international attention on the work that you've done. One of the things I really have to hit on, though, is, just the influence that you have had almost by osmosis to empower kids to actually become empowered and become voices for change. Something that you were intimately involved in. And it probably helped because of the fact that you had been a victim yourself and you had experienced trauma yourself. Let me just paint the picture a little bit. It was Valentine's Day in 2018. You were at your state capitol office, and you were actually getting ready for the twins' first birthday at the time. I know that there were pink and blue balloons, and you were getting cupcakes ready. And then there was a phone call that something had happened in your district in Broward County, specifically Parkland, Florida.
Yeah, it was, I think about that day, and it was just like any other day. I was presenting my budget I had just drafted the budget for the environment for the state, and I had gotten like a little ping on my phone, and I had seen that there was a shooting at home, and, ran to my office and, watched in horror, as everyone else did, about the things that were happening in Parkland at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. And there's this tremendous amount of, helplessness that you feel, and wanting to do something, but not wanting to get in the way. And so, the next day I went down there with Senate leadership, and we learned about, some of the things that were happening. But that day I was connected with a wonderful young lady who I love and respect and think, the world of, and that was the President, Jackie Corin. And she said, we have to make a change, and we have to do something different. And, the night before, right before the vigil, the elected leadership that was with me got to walk around the building, and law enforcement talked through some of the things that had happened. And it's surreal when you are, in a situation like this, but everything is, locked in time. Bikes were still chained to the fence. There were papers strewn about everywhere. I mean, everything was as it was. Everything was locked down. And so as I was walking away from the building, there was paper everywhere. And I looked down and I picked up a piece of paper, and it was AP Physics and Government. And it was how a bill becomes a law. And I turned to another member who was with me and I said, we have to do something. I mean, like, look at this. And they said, nothing is going to change. This is Florida. And I said that was not acceptable, that something had to be done. And when I talked to Jackie, I realized and understood that it was essential to make sure that they had an opportunity to use their voice. You know, being that kid, and it put me back, you know, being that kid who has been through a tremendous amount and wanting to not run from it, but to lean into it and make a change. It was important. And I needed to do it in a safe way. And we needed to do it in a way that honored their experiences, but, you know, wanted to give them every opportunity. And so we worked to bring up 100 of those kids. We made sure that every one of them had, you know, somebody to walk around with them. So we broke them up into groups, and we talked about engaging in political discourse and how to, you know, how to get your message across. You can say whatever you want to say. We didn't tell them that they couldn't say anything, but that there was certain ways that you could engage and to get your message across, feeling passion as they were. We made sure that they had counselors with them, because we had folks from the NRA there walking around with, you know, open carrying weapons, which was highly triggering to these young people. And so it was a time that I'll never, ever forget for the rest of my life. But helping, because facilitating that opportunity for these kids and, you know, watching what they have done it goes to everything that I've done, and that I think that's good in our country, engaging with that process and making it different.
I just thought it was so emblematic of everything that you've done in your career and everything that you stand for. And it really was just kind of, it was really just a proof of proving your theory about what could happen if you empower survivors, like you did to Jackie Corin. You talk about Jackie was one of the students at Marjory Stoneman Douglas School. And for the people that don't remember, there were 15 kids killed and then 17 total killed and 17 others injured. And Jackie became the founder of the March for Our Lives campaign. And I'm sure there was something to your experience that Jackie drew from because of quite frankly your presence and the work that you've done. You talk about the fact that survivors should be encouraged to face their dark. This is the thing that you did for Jackie Corin and you do for survivors everywhere. And really the people in the victim advocate world and really in society are indebted to the work that you do. You talk about why it is you do what you do. I saw in one of your TED Talks, and I found it interesting that that's the name of our series. And I also thought a lot about Dr. Henry Nicholas and his founding of Marsy's Law and the people he put together, Susan Kang and John Fleischman and Ryan Irwin. And you talked about you need to face your dark, you need to embrace your story. Dr. Nicholas had a very, very tragic thing happen to him, as we know, when his sister was murdered. And he embraced his story and let it empower you. Your other piece of advice is use your power to change the world in ways that are meaningful to you, and then recruit a team to make your vision a reality. And that's what you've done. That's what Dr. Nicholas did as leaders of the movement. So I just want to thank you for all the work that you do. And you got gun legislation, that your efforts and the efforts of Jackie Corin and the team got gun legislation passed for the first time in 2 decades in the state of Florida, which is really an incredible achievement. And in addition to that and Marsy's Law, you've now advocated for, I saw, and helped pass more than 24 state and national laws aimed at protecting children from sex abuse and helping survivors heal. So we went over a little bit, but I thought that Marjory Stoneman Douglas story was so important. And you really have walked the road from victim to survivor to thriver, which is what you talk about in a lot of your talks. So I really want to thank you for sharing your story. But another quote that I know you love, that I really think talks a lot about your story, is the quote from Maya Angelou, when she says, "We delight in the beauty of a butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve that beauty." Yeah. And your story, from going from abuse to advocate, is really inspiring to everybody. And thank you for the incredible work that you do, that you continue to do, the work that you're doing right now with your kids in the other room learning science in this crazy time. And thanks for sharing all this time with us today.
Thank you. And thank you for shining a light on this, but all of the series has been so wonderful. And, you know, I just can't say enough about Dr. Nicholas, the family, the team that he's created to make this possible, because I know we're going to get to all 50 states and create a level playing field for survivors across the country.
Well, you're a big part of that team, and we're very grateful for it. So thanks so much, Lauren, and have a great rest of the day.
You too.